I couldn't figure out whether we were going to have a blue background or a black background or that background or...
It's just confusing.
It's nuts. Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience Live. Today is Sunday, June 20th, 2010. It's Father's Day here in the United States. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining this week, Don Baker.
Good to be here.
How are you?
Just fine. Just fine.
You're not a father.
I'm not a father.
Me
no.
neither. So
I'll
not
I'll
our
say
day.
Hey to my dad.
Yeah, I called
Day.
my dad just before the show. So this is a live public access television program sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. The ACA has weekly meetings. Hey, looky there. There's like something right there. Let me push play. I can't find it. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. We're vanished.
I think that was the self-destruct button, Matt.
All right. Don't push that button. The ACA has weekly meetings every Sunday at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road beginning around 11:30. Except for the first Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series at the Austin History Center located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. The next lecture, the July lecture, will be Amy Parsons talking about Camp Quest, Texas. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come to any of our events. You don't have to be a member to attend, and that's lectures in particular are open to everybody, and we enjoy having a good crowd down there. We're getting to the point where we may actually have to look for a new venue because a handful of the lectures over the last 6 months or so have filled up the History Center. And hey, the more the merrier. Bring it on.
We've had some very popular lectures lately.
Yep.
It's been great.
After this program, in addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a show which is currently on hiatus, but would normally be a bi-weekly internet audio podcast called The Nonprofits. The plan is to bring the nonprofits back in August was the plan.
Okay.
It's now looking like it's going to be early September, maybe as kind of an intro to the Bat Cruise thing that's going to happen. I'm moving is the problem, and there's a lot of scheduling conflicts and the radio equipment, but we have plans to bring the show back once everything settles down.
They just want a show. They don't want to know about your personal life.
Well, I try to
Gotta keep them happy, Matt.
I have to tell them what's going on. Otherwise, I get, what's wrong with you, slackers? Is the show dead? Why isn't there a show? Why wasn't there a show last week? Please give me a show. I didn't do a show last week. Can you do another show?
Be demanding. Our fans
if you guys stop doing the show, will you do another show, please?
Please.
Yeah, we will. Hang tight, and we'll do what we can, including trying to even get some special editions or special guests as time and resources permit. After this program is over, we get together and go to dinner at Threadgills at 301 West Riverside Drive. Again, that's open to the public as well. If you're coming down to preach, proselytize, or provoke, please don't. Just call in. We'll have the number up on the screen shortly. Don's got a few things to talk about. I got a couple things I want to mention before we get the show underway. But we look forward to having people joining us. We're on the air till 6 o'clock. We'll be down there around 6:30 or so. And Atheist Happy Hour is every Thursday at the Dog and Duck beginning at around 7 o'clock. Quick notes. Tomorrow, if you are in the Johnson City, Tennessee area, which I'm sure at least two of you are. So, hi, sweetie. The Phelps clan from the Westboro Baptist Church is going to be in Johnson City to protest another military funeral. There are atheist groups and non-atheist groups that are planning to
do a counter protest. Right?
I don't want to necessarily call it a counter protest. The important thing to remember is that the Phelpses aren't idiots. They are. They're within their legal rights. They are intentionally operating at the very limits of their legal rights, in the hopes that perhaps somebody will sue them and they can make money. Is perhaps one of their goals.
It's a family of lawyers.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a family of lawyers and things. So for those people who are planning to go out and do something, keep that in mind, that they're operating within their legal rights. They're exercising their right to free speech, no matter how much they come off as being mean and ignorant and hateful and bigoted. So don't turn your counter-protest into a brawl
them,
or a ruckus or anything that provides great publicity for them. Instead, they should be looked at as kind of the pathetic, embarrassing cousins that we have to have around. I mean, they are the reason, they're the element of free speech that some people would like to complain about, but they are the necessary evil that comes with living in a free society. And so feel free to, scoff and jeer and look at them curiously and bring your God hates figs sign but the other thing that's important to remember is that they're there to protest a military funeral. And you can make the situation worse by turning it into a bigger deal than it is. And I wouldn't want to take steps that go beyond what the family wants you to do. So exercise some caution, but by all means, if this is an issue that you care about and something that you have an interest in, swing by, take some pictures, see if maybe you can engage Shirley in a conversation, since I'm sure that she'll be there. Maybe ask her how long she thinks it'll be before we can protest her dad's funeral. Maybe she got a rough estimate or something. And remind them that we support their right to free speech, even if they are flaming asshats. And you kind of have to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention before I turn it over to Don is that, in addition, if you don't get through on the phones today, or you don't want to, you can email tv@atheist-community.org. That goes to myself, the co-hosts, the people behind the scenes. We can't possibly answer all of them. We get just bucket loads of email. And curiously, something that I have to remind people of on occasion, I'm pretty much a what you see is what you get guy. I don't take it easy on people when they present horrible arguments or say something stupid simply because we happen to agree on one issue with respect to religion or atheism or whatever else. So if you agree with me on something and you're writing in to challenge me on another issue, don't expect me to say, "Oh, I'm talking to an atheist," or an agnostic or something else. So I'll just have to, kind of politely sugarcoat it. If your argument's BS, that's what I'm going to say. And I'm sorry if it, ends up rubbing some people the wrong way, or if you were a fan of the show right up until I disagreed with your crazy idea, sorry. The one thing that I'm going to be pushing for over the next year with calls, particularly calls from theistic people or people who have some disagreement, is, do you care? First of all, do you care whether or not your beliefs are true versus whether or not they're just comforting or feel right or intuitively? Do you care whether or not your beliefs are true? And if so, how do we go about figuring that out? The other thing to ask, do you care about the world that you live in? The impact that individuals' beliefs have on the world that we share? Because if you don't care, then I can hang up and go on to somebody who does care. Because some of us do care. Some of us do care about the world we live in, and some of us do care whether or not our beliefs are true. And we care enough that we have investigated the best ways to determine whether or not our beliefs are true, and we spend a great deal of time engaged in conversations in order to either demonstrate that our beliefs are true, or to demonstrate that other assertions simply are not justified. If you don't care whether or not your beliefs are true, if you believe because it feels good, don't even bother calling in. Because there's no point in having a conversation there. I'm not interested in talking to people who only want to preach, who only want to share their, this is what, my beliefs have done for me. Couldn't care less. So if you care, call in. We'll have the number up shortly. Don, what'd you bring for today?
Well, I wanted to talk about some of the insights I have, I think, in debating with theists. A lot of hardcore atheists like to debate. They get into arguments and these sorts of things. And that's sort of part of the purpose of the show, is to interact with theists. And a lot of atheists get frustrated with this sort of thing because it's very hard to change people's minds. And I've been frustrated too. But another thing that's kind of come up is that there seems to be some very common problems with these sorts of debates, these sorts of arguments that are used over and over again. The reasons why which theists believe in things or they present things tend to fall into three kind of problematic categories. And what are these problems? Well, one category is lies and deception and falsehoods, that whatever you're saying just isn't right. You're deceiving yourself or you're trying to deceive me, and the facts that you've started with are just false. The facts that you're claiming are just false. And so that can't be a basis of building any sort of argument or any sort of a way of convincing somebody else. The next one is logical fallacies. Is like, well, you put a string of things together and then you reach a conclusion that doesn't add up from that because you've used a logical fallacy or something that just doesn't logically follow from the facts you presented. And the third one is emotional manipulation, where you've given up on argument altogether and you're trying to mess with somebody's head, and that has no bearing on God or whatever. So my new tactic in these debates is I'll sort of say when somebody starts doing these things, I'll say, well, hey, I commonly see these three problems, and debate with me, and you can use God on your side, and you can use prayer and all this stuff. And the minute you say one of these things, you sort of admit that whatever you're presenting is garbage because you can't build anything reasonable from these things. And why should you? The truth doesn't need these things. Why? If you're selling something really wonderful, then you don't need to lie, right? There's no need for that. And if theists are claiming that their God is real, then they shouldn't have to use these tactics. So far, my frustration is a little bit lower using this sort of tactic, in the sense that I don't have to go on and on and on with people because I get to stop, and I get to stop with sort of a reason to stop. And unfortunately, I'm still disappointed in the sense that I have yet to have anybody. Any theist debate with me and have a debate and convince me of anything, or convince any objective, rational person of anything without using these tactics. So I've started to call these three, the deception, logical fallacies, and emotional manipulation, as the three pillars of apologetics, is what I'm calling them today. And so that's the topic of the show. This is kind of a follow-on to a show that Jen and Martin did about 3 months ago, where they were talking about how apologetics fail. I'm talking a little bit more about why they fail, or the categories of failure, and so on. So today, feel free to call in and say, hey, I got this great argument for God, and it doesn't suffer these problems. Or, if you're a minister, if you've got something beyond deception and logical fallacies and emotional manipulation, bring it on. We'd love to hear it. So what I want to do today is talk about these three in turn very quickly, and then talk about some of the common arguments that we get for God, and why it falls into these categories, and how many of the things we hear are combinations of these things. So for deception and lies and falsehood, well, this often includes self-deception. Sometimes people believe things that just aren't true, and then they repeat them uncritically without ever having looked into them. And of course, the number, you can't, just like two wrongs don't make a right, you can't add up a whole bunch of lies and arrive at the truth. So if you're making an argument, you have to always have truthful stuff in the argument. Because as soon as you admit to a lie in an argument, then it invalidates the entire argument, and you can't get anywhere. Often these sorts of deceptions are just bald assertions where somebody's making some claim without any justification, or without any idea that justification is needed for that claim. So here are some big ones. For example, early Christianity valued embellishment. They thought at that time that the more grandiose and wonderful the story they could tell, the more people they would get in, or whatever, the better it would be. Today we try not to do those things, or we frown on those things, because if those embellishments and things aren't true, then it just sort of invalidates whatever you're trying to do. The virgin birth is a perfect example of that. It's like, okay, well, virgin births are a common thing in mythology. Let's have Jesus be born of a virgin, and it's a pretty well-known thing that Jesus. The nativity story of Jesus is made up, was invented after the fact, and it's just mythology. So this is a good example of, if you make these claims, or if you put these displays on your yard, you're sort of lying to the world. Also, claims about Jesus raising the dead or walking on water, these sorts of things, they need better justification than just some sort of story in the Bible. So, by themselves, they're not that convincing, and they're not that interesting. In more modern times, we have the Christian nation myth, which is just a propaganda campaign that's coming out, the Christian founding and these sorts of things. Yes, many of the founders were Christian, but they intentionally made a secular government, and please don't forget that. And they intentionally separated church and state, and that was, the core of the founding of our nation. Another example of a big lie and falsehood is this intelligent design movement. There is absolutely nothing solid behind that. It's just another propaganda campaign that supposedly evolution is a theory in crisis sort of thing, and that's just a lie. So, and there's a lot of equivocation about the word theory. The way scientists use theory and the way the common person uses theory are two different things, and by saying just a theory, you're equivocating those two, and that's a type of deception. So those are some big ones that we see as far as deception. Here are some common ones. Assertions without evidence, to claim that Jesus loves you. Well, demonstrate a Jesus first, and demonstrate, what do you mean by love in this context? Love often gets redefined. Jesus rose on the third day from being killed. Well, that's another sort of assertion that uses the Bible as evidence. Well, if we don't believe in the Bible, if you don't have any evidence that supports this Bible, why should we believe it? Another one we hear often is AIDS is God's judgment against gays, or whatever weather phenomenon is against gays or against whatever. You hear those sorts of things, and it's just a bunch of BS, right? Because you don't have any evidence of your God, and here you are trying to attribute some behavior of this non-existent thing, or probably non-existent thing, to weather, which really has no rhyme or reason to it. Haiti made a pact with the devil. Pat Robertson said that recently. This is just BS, is really the category this is. As far as biblical interpretation, people love to project their own beliefs onto the Bible and say, oh, the Bible agrees with me, therefore God says this. And there's been a recent study about how everybody's concept of God is really sort of a mirror image of their own beliefs and biases and these sorts of things. And so really all you're doing is you're puffing yourself up to make your beliefs, God's beliefs, and it's a way, kind of a pufferfish sort of deception. And why should we believe you if one person's belief is this and another person's belief is the opposite of this? You sort of cancel each other out. There's obviously not a God there. You're just sort of making it up. Another tactic you see in this area is saying, oh well, what's the likelihood of a single-celled organism popping into existence out of nowhere, and gee, how unlikely is it? But what they're not doing, and where they're being dishonest, is they're not comparing the likelihood of God popping into existence out of nowhere. So there's not a valid comparison. Just because something is unlikely doesn't mean it's impossible. And if you're going to look at likelihoods, you've got to do due diligence and compare it to the likelihood of the thing you're asserting is more likely. So these are some of the ways that we see deceptions and falsehoods propagated, and you often hear these early in arguments where people will just make claims, and then the atheist will have to back up. He'll have to ask them, why do you believe that, or what's your evidence for that, and so on. When you get into a more sophisticated argument, and the more sophisticated apologists, they start to stringing together logical arguments, and so there's some fairly famous arguments for the existence of God. There's the teleological argument, the cosmological argument, the ontological argument, and these sorts of things. And all of them, the tag, right, the transcendental argument is another one we've tangled with. Every last one of them suffers from the problem of logical fallacies. Here's an example. Don is a man. I'm a man. Men are fallible. All men are fallible. Okay, that would be the second argument, and then you might come to the conclusion God exists. So that would be a notion of a logical fallacy. You arrive at the conclusion you want, but the steps just don't add up. right? So that's kind of logical fallacies 101. And it turns out that you might start with some facts that are true, but the conclusions you reach from them are false because you've missed a step or you've done this. And you can think of these as sophisticated lies. They're lies that look like you're reasoning well, but in actuality, you dig it down a little bit and they're false. And so we see a lot of these. A common one is an argument from popularity. Something like, oh, well, everybody believes in God, therefore God must exist. That's an argument from popularity. A lot of people believe in God, therefore it must be true. Well, the truth of something doesn't matter who believes it, right? It's not a popularity contest. And a counter example of this is a lot of people believe the earth was flat at one time. That doesn't mean it was flat then, and it doesn't mean it is flat now. It never has been flat. So who cares, right? It doesn't matter whether a lot of people believe it. Another one is called false dichotomy, where you hear that in the famous lunatic, liar, or Lord. I forget who brought that up.
C.S. Lewis.
Okay, C.S. Lewis. So is Jesus a lunatic? Is he a liar? Is he a Lord? And there's a long, complicated description. He can't be any of those, so he must be Lord. Well, this is actually a false trichotomy, right? Because there's three options given, but a fourth one might be legend, right? So legend is conspicuously absent from this list, and it turns out that that's the most likely one. And so it's a bit of a mind game where you're saying, well, you got to choose between these two or three things, and the real choice is off, not even presented to you. And so that's a bit of a thing. Another one we see all the time is shifting the burden of proof. Atheists doubt the existence of God, and we have yet to see evidence for God, right? So in a sense, we're saying we don't have any compelling reason to believe in God. That's our position. If you are saying that there is a God, you're making a positive claim, and that needs to be backed up with evidence. You have to say, well, if you're claiming that there's a God that exists, you have to say, oh, this is the reason why. So what often happens is the theist will say, oh, well, you have to prove that God doesn't exist. And my sort of canonical counterexample of this is, well, I can claim to be a millionaire, and if I say you can't prove that I'm not a millionaire, does that make me rich?
Yeah. Right?
No. Whether or not you can prove something doesn't have any basis on whether it's true or not. So, this is a matter of convincing someone.
Well, I'd rephrase that.
Okay.
Whether or not you can prove something it does impact whether or not you can tell it's true. It's
right.
Being unable to disprove something doesn't tell you whether or not it's true.
Right. Okay, that's a better way of saying it. There's the argument from incredulity of I can't believe this, so it must be true. So there's a whole mess of these, and I think that atheists learn these, and I think that a serious atheist gets to know these logical fallacies and gets to recognize them because they come up all the time in like advertising and politics and these sorts of things. And in a weird way, I think atheists are better off for this sort of thing. We're more aware of these ways of manipulating people, and we're kind of on top of that. We still make mistakes, right? I make mistakes all the time, but I think I'm better equipped than a lot of folks to recognize these sorts of things and so on. So the third one I want to talk about is often when the theist gets frustrated and can't make any sort of reasonable argument anymore, they get frustrated and they start with the emotional manipulation. Well, God's going to get you is kind of often where it goes. And this is in the category of emotional manipulation and thuggery. And it's a plea to believe in God or Jesus for emotional reasons, which is a terrible reason to believe for anything. God, the existence of God or Jesus or whatever does not depend on your mental state, right? If he did, then we could just say that these things are a figment of my imagination and we'd be done, right? So reality doesn't depend on your emotional state. This is just a way of bullying somebody, and it's also fundamentally dishonest. So if you haven't gotten it yet, all three of these mechanisms, all three of these pillars of apologetics are dishonest, and therefore there's nothing there. See, and religion is rich with emotional undertones. You know, you think of the emotional associations we have with God. Well, we fear God because He's a big bully, a big thug. We can feel hate of the non-pious and non-believers. That's a common thing. You know, the people that aren't kowtowing to the same God. We can be in awe of the power of God. We can feel threatened, or we can feel like we're going to get a reward. God is the judge. We also can feel this notion of fatherhood or being a subject of a lord. So all of these are kind of rich emotional feelings that you feel with God, and these are ways that people get manipulated by this notion of God, is because of all these emotional connotations. With Jesus, it's kind of the opposite. You feel there's a strong association with love and love of humanity. There's an association of guilt, of feeling empathy for Jesus' suffering and the sort of guilt or whatever. There's idolization for how he supposedly dealt with the poor and these sorts of things. So it's almost like a good cop, bad cop thing, you know. No matter what emotion you have, you can either associate it with God or Jesus, and it's almost like a codependent sort of thing, you know. Jesus loves you, but God thinks you're a wretch that needs to be tortured, and Jesus and God are the exact same thing, and it's just very odd, sort of mind's fuck as far as I can tell. So
the frustration isn't limited to theists at all. Frustration is a human trait, and I think I'm a perfect example of somebody who's demonstrated that, you know, being able to get frustrated over and over again.
Yeah.
And actually, if I can pause for a second, there's a call that actually deals with that. So it's like right in the middle.
Okay.
We've got Pedja from Germany.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thanks to Matt and all the other guys for the show. Just 5 minutes ago, I used Matt's "You're More Moral Than God" approach, and when I kind of hit the wall, and I wanted to talk to you about the those three pillars you said that they can be pretty strong. I mean, at some point, I just get into this like I'm hitting the wall with someone. It's like they just don't get that 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah.
And you know, I know Matt's approach is usually to hang up.
Yeah.
But,
see, I mean,
I'm wondering, do you have any, you know, like any advice what to do with them? You know?
Yeah. How do you handle people who just don't get it?
Yeah.
And this goes to what I was talking about regarding frustration. I am frustrated by people who refuse to argue honestly, who want to just move on to the next argument and not acknowledge that their initial point had been refuted. People who constantly repeat, they're just not grasping that I've come up with something that refutes their argument. They just move on to another analogy that's the same as the one before.
Yeah, there's a moving target.
It drives me crazy.
Tactic.
And on occasion, perhaps on too many occasions, perhaps not, I'll just tell them they're an idiot and hang up. Now, the problem with this is that people don't. I don't realize, or don't always. I'm not always aware that people don't know me as well as I know me, and obviously, when I reach that point where I'm going to hang up and you're an idiot, I'm not telling them that idiot or moron is the sum total of what I think about them and everything they believe. I'm saying within the context of that argument, they're being an idiot. And oh, by the way, I'm not immune to that. I've been an idiot and a moron and a buffoon many, many times. The difference is that I seem to actually care about whether or not I'm being an idiot and a moron. And when somebody identifies that and says you're being an idiot, my immediate reaction is to go figure out why are they identifying me as an idiot? What have I done? Can I correct it, or are they mistaken? And the people that I find myself frustrated with are the ones who, when they hear that, they don't care. They care more about protecting their beliefs than whether or not they're true.
Or they write you off as someone who's an emotional.
Oh,
you're mean.
So,
You're mean.
I usually just give up because, I mean, after a point, it just doesn't make sense, and you know, I was wondering if I don't know.
I have a couple of suggestions for you. One thing Jeff D does is he makes very sure that the person he's arguing with acknowledges the point that Jeff made, And if Jeff has won an argument, he forces them to say, yes, I concede this point, before going on to the next thing. It's tiresome, but I think it's a good strategy.
The other thing is that if you get the sensation that it's just going to go from one thing to the other, Jeff's the best person to make recommendations about this, I guess, is to say, okay, give me your best argument.
And that's the one I was going to talk about next. Yeah. Get them to start at the beginning. Say, give me your best argument, the one that is going to convince me or whatever, and there is no better argument, right? And and refer to your God. Pray to your God. Make sure you two agree that it's the very best argument, right? And then when you refute it, then you're done, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I'm done, but they're not. They switch to a different.
Yeah. Well,
different topic,
you have to get them to agree. Agree early on that they're going to present the best one. My tactic that I'm presenting today is, I say, hey, there are these three problems, and I state pretty early on in the argument that if you use any of these tactics, you're lying to me. You're full of BS, right? And I say, the minute you hit one of these landmines, you're dead. I win, and I'm not going to argue with you anymore. And I stop, because going on, let me jump up a level. I debate to learn myself. I don't believe that I'm going to convince very many people. And I try to debate in public forums so that people who are listening in, the lurkers, get the benefit of seeing this argument play out, and they can hopefully learn from it, either the people sitting on the fence or really the audience there. And so often when you're doing one-on-one debates with someone who's got their mind made up, it's a waste of time. And
I don't. I usually do it so that there's other people, because that's also my goal for the audience to make up their own mind. So yeah, and I like the three things you mentioned, and I also like the what Matt just said also at the beginning about do you care thing. I'm going to use that one as well.
Okay.
Well, I'm not going to take up any of your time more because it's already midnight here. Just wanted to tell you, for the guys at Ustream that made fun of me for 2 + 2 = 2 thing, and I'm not German, I'm Serbian. I'm also a vice president of Serbian Atheists, a new organization if you can call it that. And you can imagine how popular we are. And, I'm arguing people that, our beast is just like your beast, but they think it's completely different. And it's just annoying. But, yeah, just wanted to say thank you, guys. I'm
good luck to you.
Using a lot of your arguments, and I love it. So keep up the good work.
Oh, you
Thanks
too.
a lot for calling.
You too.
Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks.
So, you want to...
Yeah, let me go a little bit more.
Yeah.
We've talked about these three pillars, and what I wanted to do is sort of talk about some of the common things we hear from the audience and maybe talk about how they fit in here. Sometimes we theists hear, Jesus died for your sins, okay? So first off, this is just a bald assertion, right? That A, Jesus died, B, there was some purpose to it, and 3, there's this sort of guilt thing going on that, I have sins, I'm an evil, awful person, and it's going to make up for it, and I should feel guilty about this. So I would call this both, a blatant assertion without justification and an emotional manipulation. So I think it fits in those two categories. Pascal's wager is one we hear all the time. It's better to believe, briefly, Pascal's wager is better to believe and be wrong than and not risk going to hell. And this is also, there's a lot of problems with this. I did a whole show on it once. One problem is it's again a false dichotomy. We're not only talking about the Christian God, there's a whole mess of gods out there, and how do you make them all happy, and how do you avoid the hells or whatever, how do you avoid going to Hades or whatever hell they've dreamed up in their religions, and pretty soon it's just pretty crazy. It's an emotional thing because it's an appeal to hedonism, right? You're trying to avoid being tortured after you die, and there's no reason to believe that anything is going to exist after you die to be tortured. You can torture the atoms that were part of you at some point, but I don't know. Seems kind of silly. It also misses the probability of God's existence. So when you try to do the math on this sort of thing, that actually is an important fact to play in here. Here's another one. Atheists lack morals, and morals come from God. Therefore, atheists can't be moral. Well, this is another bald assertion. It's an assertion without evidence. It's trying to steal credit for morality for God, which is another false thing. It's an emotional appeal because it appeals to the sense of superiority of Christians that, I believe, therefore I must be moral. So that's it for today. Call in with your own examples. Call in with your examples of things you've heard that fall in these categories, or things you've heard or arguments you've heard that don't fall into it. I'd love to expand this list, but I haven't heard any decent argument for God that didn't fall in these categories, or that I haven't heard any argument at all that didn't. Let's not qualify it with decent.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's take some more calls, Matt.
So, as a reminder, we're on for just under another hour, and after we're done here, we'll be going to dinner at Thread Gills, 301 West Riverside Drive. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us. In addition, I wanted to make sure that I announced the thing that I skipped in the actual announcements, which is that registration is now open for our bat cruise, our annual bat cruise. Austin has one of the, or the largest population of metropolitan bats in the world. Mm-hmm. Millions. And so on September 25th, we're going to be renting a boat going out on the lake from 6 to 8 p.m. And I think it's going to be preceded by a lecture from me and maybe some other stuff. And also for the people who are interested, after we're done, we get together and some of us go to Esther's Follies. But that is something that you'll need to book separately, that we're not doing as... It's just too much hassle to try and...
So it's my job to put that information up on the webpage. I haven't done that yet, but there'll be a whole day of activities starting early afternoon and going into the evening. So if you want to come to Austin and visit us, we'd love to have you. We try to make this our flagship event for out-of-towners to come visit us, and hopefully it'll be worth your while.
And it works. We've had people from Canada and Alaska and England and
all over the U.S.
Yeah.
So and it's a fun way to.
Space is limited.
Yeah, and the bats are cool to watch.
Yeah.
They're awesome.
Plus, you can, if you bring the little kids along, you can tell them to look up and open their mouth, and maybe get a surprise.
Guano bombs.
All right, we got Hal from Manchester. How are you?
How you doing?
Good.
All right. I kind of described what I wanted to do to your guy a little wrong. My argument is about Chinese symbols and how they. I don't want to say they prove Genesis, but I want to say it's evidence of a common source.
Okay, so you're claiming that the Chinese symbols predate the Bible and were influencing the Bible? Is that where you're going?
No, I'm saying that's I'm at a loss of words here. I'm not really sure how to explain this.
I think I can help you. I think I can help you. Chinese.
Right, I'll just go over it with you, and you'll get what I'm saying, I guess.
I think I already know what you're saying. Chinese characters are made up of a bunch of different symbols. It's not a phonetic language like English or an alphabet like that. It's a bunch of pictures that symbolize other things. And so there are people who say, if you look at, for example, the Chinese character for devil, it includes sub-characters within that character that are like garden and tempter and that type of stuff. And I know the Answers in Genesis site has this up there saying that this demonstrates that these 4,000-year-old characters, that people in China were aware of the creation story. Is that what your point was?
They were aware of the Jewish creation story, you're saying?
Yeah, that's the argument, that the nature of these characters for the word for devil is such that the person who created that character was aware of the Jewish creation story. Is that?
Okay, yeah, okay. All right, I kind of misinterpreted what you were saying at first. Okay, but
so this is a question to you. Is this what you were talking about?
That's what you were talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what? I mean, there's three possible.
I just think it's interesting.
there's three possible explanations. Either somebody who invented that character in the ancient Chinese writings was familiar with the Jewish creation myth and wanted to pass that along. That kind of makes sense, that you make a character that relates to the story. That's kind of the way Chinese works, although I'm not an expert. So that's one possibility, that the person who created that character was familiar with those stories. The other possibility is that people are seeing patterns in those characters, and that Chinese language in particular lends itself to finding patterns of words and other words. I'd say that that's also viable, considering that you can walk into any marketing department in China, and what they end up doing is twisting and turning their characters into new fonts so that you portray more message and people read more into it than what the actual character's for. And the third possibility is that the Genesis account, the Jewish creation myth, is true, and that the God of the Jews decided to reveal this to a Chinese guy as well. Now, of the three, which is the least likely?
You see, now, if you ask me, the last option is the most likely, because
Why?
this is going along with ancient Chinese, and these symbols supposedly predate any Jewish civilization.
Well, how is that possible? Doesn't that contradict your Bible? Wasn't the Jewish civilization the first?
Well, no, the Jewish civilization didn't always exist. That's something that came along
my
a while after.
No. My next question would be okay, if somehow this creation story influenced China somehow, ancient China, what else you got except a character?
No, we don't go do an okay and go on to that.
No, okay.
The reason is you're saying that it's more likely of those three possibilities that a God did it, and then you're saying that it's because the character predates Jewish culture. Well, that's in direct violation with what the Bible has to say. I mean, Adam and Eve, the formation.
This is what I'm saying. The Hebrews did not exist at the
So
first time
what?
of creation.
So what?
They existed.
So what? The story did.
It's a little coincidental that the Chinese characters existed before the Jews even existed.
No. Okay, I apologize, Hal. You're being an idiot about this, and here's why. The story existed. If the story was true or not, the story existed. Are you saying that the story didn't exist for the Hebrews until after the Chinese invented the character? How is that possible?
That's what I've heard, is that these characters existed before the Hebrews came along and
let's think for a second.
Wrote down their stories.
Let's think for a second. If the Chinese character existed before the story existed, then clearly the story can't be true. Because if the story is true, then this is the story that was passed along from father to son, from Adam all the way to Moses. Now, those two things are in direct contradiction. Either this story existed within the zeitgeist of Hebrew culture before the nation of Jews became extant, or it did not. And if it did, then it's no surprise that a Chinese person might have found out about it and created a character. And if it didn't, then it's irrelevant that China has a character for this.
Well, you see,
it's
this
reductive.
This is the point I'm getting at, though, right here, is that the Chinese, even though they were an isolated civilization from the Hebrews and stuff, and they existed before the Hebrews, and these characters were in existence before the stories came up. And what I'm saying is, though, is that they were already aware of the creation account.
So the Chinese existed before the Hebrews, and they were aware of God's creation of the Hebrews.
Of the whole world.
Well, but oh wow. All right, let me backtrack.
The Hebrews weren't the only people that got created.
Wow. Let me backtrack, because what I tried to demonstrate is called a reductio ad absurdum. That you take the premises as granted and you demonstrate that they lead to a contradiction. And your premises were such that the Chinese character for devil, for example, predates Jewish culture. Right?
Yes.
How is that possible if the Bible is true? The formation of a Hebrew nation comes afterwards, but the story of the creation follows those characters from Adam through Moses. It doesn't matter that we hadn't put a label on a Hebrew culture yet. If the Bible story...
What? Okay, I'll let you finish.
if the Bible story is true, which is what you're arguing by saying that the Chinese knew about it before the Hebrews, then that is self-refuting because the Hebrews would have known the whole time. It doesn't matter what they were called. From Adam to Moses, this is a tradition.
He seems to be saying the story predates Adam, which is crazy, right?
Okay.
Did Adam know the story?
Did Adam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Did Adam's children know the story?
I'm sorry, did Adam what?
Did Adam's children know the story?
Yes.
And we're all descended from Adam's, including both the Chinese and the Hebrews, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how could the Chinese story predate the reality that it's coming from, that you're arguing for?
Well, you see, this is what I'm saying. Sure, I mean the Hebrews weren't aware of it, before Moses, but the Chinese, though, they had kept the story going, and they eventually lost it again.
Okay.
Supposedly, Moses was a descendant of Adam.
They recorded it through their symbols.
Okay. So one of the descendants of Adam and Eve
forgot,
eventually became Chinese, remembered the story and taught it to maybe, let's say, the Egyptians, who then taught it to Moses, and then Moses wrote it down, and then it became the story of the Jews.
Well, I don't know about that. Did the Chinese ever encounter the Egyptians?
Well, I don't know.
And all of this is
Wouldn't
more
that be
likely
something-
than a mind game?
Yeah, all of it, you're saying that the mere fact that this Chinese character, which kind of maps to a character in the Jewish stories, predates the earliest Jewish record of these stories, means that it's more likely that a god revealed all of this to the Chinese. And you're doing this despite the fact that this god in the story somehow didn't choose the Chinese as his chosen people.
Well, the Chinese back in those days just pretty much still carried on the story, but among the Hebrew people, they lost it. But then you can read like Exodus and stuff, and that's when they become God's chosen people.
And you think that's all more likely than the other two options?
I do. I just find it too coincidental.
Oh, so your argument, okay, because when I started the show, my primary question was, do you care whether or not what you believe is true? And you're claiming that you do care, but your argument is that this is too coincidental. It's too unlikely to have happened any other way than by divine intervention. And I wonder by what criteria you have made a determination that divine intervention is the best explanation, other than your own befuddlement at other possibilities.
It's all on the assumption that the ancient Chinese were isolated from the Middle Eastern and Semitic cultures. Now, if somebody comes up to me and shows me that they did encounter each other before these symbols were created, then I'll accept that right there. But just like I said, right now I'm assuming
the story you're accepting necessarily draws that conclusion. Let me break this down for you. You just said if somebody demonstrates evidence that the Chinese came into contact with them prior to then. And let's start at Adam, because we're accepting your story as true, and then it branches down, which means they've always been connected. They are all the result of the same tree.
Well, yeah. I'm saying, but after all that, like before the symbols were created, and people can show just not like by biblical accounts.
Basically, you have no clue what you're talking about, but you evaluated three prospects and concluded that a divine intervention is more likely than human error, or that one guy met another guy and wanted to pass on his creation myth. Really?
Well,
now you're shifting Now you're shifting the burden of proof, because now you have convinced yourself that answer is likely, and you won't change your mind until somebody shows you evidence that absolutely contradicts it. And you don't think that is a dishonest argument?
I've looked this stuff up, and I haven't found anything about the Chinese encountering.
Well, that's an argument from laziness.
Yeah, you've taken argument from incredulity to argument from laziness. You haven't found anything, therefore you're shifting the burden of proof to other people. You haven't established.
I'm really not trying to shift the burden of proof to anybody.
You did.
Said I personally wasn't able to find anything. I'm open to being proven wrong.
I
wasn't personally able to find anything. But
that's a
else.
shifting of the burden of proof. To say that you're open to being proven wrong and that as soon as somebody presents you with evidence that contradicts it, that's a shifting of the burden of proof. The only justifiable position you're in at this point is to say, I have no idea whether or not this is sufficient
And that's
evidence.
the most honest thing to say.
To say that,
Yeah.
divine intervention is the best explanation, but yet you have managed to conclude the exact opposite. That it's more likely that the stories, these grand supernatural stories are true, and that this God somehow preserved this story through one lineage, than that some person met another person and told stories. Something that we know has happened all the time since the beginning of our ability to talk. And yet you've concluded that it's more likely that there is a God who intervened. And I don't understand how you can defend that. That's like saying, I know my mom has done my laundry every week in my entire life, but I believe that the clothes that are folded and sitting on my bed are from sky pixies who came in and scrubbed them last night. That is the absurdity of what you're saying. And it's more possible, and until somebody shows me proof that my mom actually did the laundry, I'm going to keep on believing about the laundry pixies.
Well, all I can really say is, I can only repeat what I've already just said.
Which would be a really bad idea.
Yeah.
Like I said, I personally find it coincidental.
Yeah, me too.
That these things, and I say the common source goes all the way back to Adam. But if somebody can, like I said, if somebody can actually show me that the common source was long, like after that, I don't know, just something that doesn't agree with a biblical history.
Yeah.
Then
so you bought into something you like, and until somebody shows you different, you're going to cling to it.
I think the point to make here is that often the most honest and honorable answer is to say you don't know, and use that as a kind of a kick in the butt to say, well, I'm going to go learn more, and I'm going to hopefully, make decisions based on good evidence and that sort of thing. If I care about it enough, if it matters, then go forward and learn. But it's generally dishonest to pick an answer and then try to conduct some sort of horse race where you're racing the answer you like the most against other answers. It's better to withhold your belief until you have proper evidence.
I'd really like to get to the core of it, because this baffles me. This goes back to the, do you care whether or not your beliefs are true, which I'm going to end up repeating a lot. I'd like to find out how it is that a reasonably intelligent person can look at all this and say, wow, I just can't believe that this happened any other way than some mystical, supernatural convergence of events type thing.
Well, it could be ignorance about, the fact that we see patterns in things. We are
But
programmed.
he's denying that. He's saying that our propensity to see patterns is less likely than that this pattern is true. Mm-hmm. I don't understand how anybody can say that they care whether or not something's true, be presented with all of this information, and then say, I think it's more likely that the story is true and a God did it. That is such a perversion of reasoning to me that I cannot possibly grasp it. It is as absurd as
maybe
thinking
God does everything.
that fairies have done your laundry. It is, and it's, by the way, it's special pleading, because you could be presented with 1,000 other coincidences like that from hundreds of other religions, and your criteria for determining whether or not something is true would force you to accept all of them. How do you deal with that?
Can you give me an example of something like that?
Off the top of my head, I'm not going to give you another example, because I don't find this one particularly compelling. Why? Okay, list any of the similarities between, for example, Jesus and the hundreds of other messianic claims, or the Athanasius, or not Athanasius, Apollonius, or the similarities between. There are stories that have those similarities. You have not heard of any of those?
Well, I mean, I have heard of Apollonius. I remember watching this
Okay,
National Geographic special on him.
So what reason would you have for rejecting either the Apollonius stories or the Jesus stories?
Well, I have my personal reasons for
Yeah,
believing.
okay, we're done. We're done, Hal.
To be convinced by it.
We're done.
But,
We're done because you won't argue honestly. You just went straight to, oh, I have my personal reasons, which tells me you don't give a damn about whether or not something's true. And we've already tried over and over again.
It's just that it's a long story, and I don't think you guys really want to waste all your time listening to it.
Probably not. I'm interested in actual truth and somebody who can actually demonstrate truth. And I don't think that your story is going to get there if you began by talking about Chinese characters and how it's so unlikely that these Chinese characters could have come about by any other reason than that the story is true and that God dictated or influenced the Chinese people with the Jewish creation myth. I mean,
well, if I can find evidence in support of another theory, this is the one I'm going to default to for now.
Oh, now we get to the crux. You're saying, I'm going to accept this until I find better evidence of something else.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you not see the problem with that?
No, because I think the circumstantial evidence in support of this is pretty sufficient for now.
I'll tell you the problem with that. I'm going to accept that lightning bolts come from Zeus until I find out better information. I'm going to accept that bumps on people's foreheads tell me what's going on inside their heads until I get better information. I'm going to accept that diseases are caused by demons and devils and we need to engage in bloodletting until I find better information. The problem is that you've accepted an answer without sufficient evidence, and you're willing to be wrong about it while running around thinking you're right, and that makes you an idiot. That means that you don't care about what's actually true. You care about assuaging your discomfort with not knowing. You are so uncomfortable by not having an answer that you're willing to latch on to whatever seems most intuitively reasonable to you and comforts you. And that's not a pathway to truth at all.
I personally don't see a problem in
I know.
just assuming one answer is true until evidence is presented to suggest otherwise.
Yeah. I know you don't, and I don't know why you don't. And I wish I could find out, because we could fix the whole world as soon as we figure out why you don't. I can't explain it. I can't explain it.
All over the place do the same thing.
What?
Scientists all over the place do the same thing.
No, they freaking don't. Do not pretend.
One huge example is the origin of the Big Bang.
Hal,
A lot of scientists will say the
shut the
multiverse
fuck
is
up,
the
Hal.
origin of the
Let
Big
me
Bang,
finish.
so there's no evidence of a multiverse.
Hal,
You're
do
on
not
hold.
pretend that what you're doing is even remotely comparable to science. Science doesn't just latch on to whatever feels good and then hopes maybe later on we'll find the truth. Science gives explanations and doesn't assert absolute certainty at any point. And what they do is they give the best explanation that is supported by evidence, that is subject to peer review. They build models that actually make testable predictions that prove useful. You're not doing anything remotely like that. And the fact that you have deluded yourself to thinking that science does this too is absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. You not only don't care whether or not something's true, you have poisoned your own mind to the extent that you have no pathway to understanding how to find out if something's true. And the one thing that can be used to get us as close as possible to a true understanding, you denigrate it to being the equivalent of the asinine guesswork burden-shifting thing that you've just engaged in. We're done, Hal. Completely. We're moving on. Science just guesses until it finds a new answer.
No.
Sorry.
Science follows where the evidence leads, and there's human error in science, but it gets corrected over time. In the long term, it's a reliable way of finding answers about the world.
There's just no assertion of absolute certainty in science.
No.
There's
And the
no
testable
assertion
claims
that
thing is
scientists
very
aren't
important, right?
fallible.
Because it says, okay, I got a theory, it makes this testable claim, and it could be proven wrong tomorrow. right? These theories are very vulnerable in the sense that any evidence that counteracts it makes that theory false.
Yeah.
And it's those theories that go through this running the gauntlet of all these tests that emerge at the end as the most likely things. And making testable claims is awesome. It's a very high standard of being tested against the real world.
Hal's convinced himself that he's being open-minded. And I see this all the time, especially from the pseudoscientific woo-woo, crowd, that they're being open-minded, that, well, we haven't completely disproven homeopathy, so I might as well engage in it, And,
Right.
Science doesn't done any better. My ass, my aching ass.
Yeah.
How dare you?
And hopping on one sort of theory or pet answer for something is kind of, your laziness ends up becoming part of the equation, in the sense that if you start with a situation where I say I don't know, then I'm not making any decisions based on false.
Yeah.
But if you start with the decision, my little pet answer is the right one, and I'm going to be lazy and not investigate it further, then you go through life making decisions based on this false thing, and your decisions affect you and other people, and that's where the problem is. Yeah. You can believe whatever you want, but once it starts affecting other people, then you're doing them harm.
Yeah, I thought I hit it nice and hard when I said, the issue of, for example, I'm going to believe that this causes diseases and bloodletting is the solution. And then immediately after saying that, it was like, well, I don't see the harm in believing whatever until... How can you not see the harm there? There's something that goes on in the mind of many theists, many religious supporters, not all. I'm not going to necessarily paint everybody with one brush. But in the mind of people who have engaged in pseudoscientific nonsense and woo and religion, etc. And it's an error that I was prone to, that I think almost any believer would be. I have no idea exactly what it is. I've tried I don't know how many different ways to find it. And we're beginning again with this, do you care whether or not your beliefs are true? And of course, everybody is going to answer yes, or almost everybody's going to answer yes to that question. Of course I care. And then, for whatever reason, when you attempt to demonstrate that they haven't followed the rigorous standards by which we would normally determine whether or not something's true, they don't see it. Yeah. And I think Hal was a perfect example, because he's convinced himself that his approach is as scientific as any other. Mm-hmm. And it's not.
No.
I mean,
no.
It's like, rolling a ball around the table and then claiming that, it's just as good as juggling 5 broken glasses. It's, it's not the same.
Yeah.
Apples and oranges.
Well,
And
again, the honorable thing is to say you don't know and find and do the due diligence and find out the best answer based on evidence.
Well, before I continue to sweat like crazy under the studio lights, I guess we'll go on to David in Cincinnati.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, David, how are you?
Not bad. How about yourself?
Good.
Hot.
Good. I think, Matt, you demonstrated great patience.
Well, I lost it,
on the standpoint of your what you said in the beginning of the show with that guy. But the reason I'm calling, I had a question for you. I had an experience. I had a miraculous experience yesterday. I was driving to the park, and I looked up at the clouds, and I saw the Cookie Monster. And I mean, it was the Cookie Monster, and he was looking right at me. And I thought, and I was wondering.
So Sesame Street must be real.
Why is it that when we see things like that, the Virgin Mary in the sky or Cookie Monster or whatever, why is it that we always see, as humans, not just religion, or religious people, why is it that we always see iconic figures like, Mickey Mouse or Pluto or Jesus? Why don't we see Spot, our dog, or Steve, our best friend, or our deceased mother?
I'd argue that on occasion we do. I mean, Beth has a great photo on her Facebook that's just a smiley face. It's just an abstract smiley face. I remember people would see bunnies or horses or animals and whatnot. I think this is a little bit of confirmation bias or reporting bias, in that the ones that we're going to hear about on the news are somebody seeing, the Virgin Mary in a piece of toast. If somebody sees, a bunny rabbit in a piece of toast, it's probably not going to get any press.
Sure.
Yeah, so there is this idea that that religious figures are more significant, and they're more significant to more people. And if you see something that somebody else can see too, then you get this snowballing effect, this mob psychology going. So it's sort of two things at play here. One is the fact that we can see patterns and things, and all these images and things that we're exposed to. If you're exposed to Mary all the time, then you're going to see Mary in lots of places. That's one effect, and the other is the mob psychology of oh, this is significant, and oh, do you see it too, and are you blessed, and all this stuff, and then it snowballs and gets into the press or whatever.
Yeah, I love reports of pareidolia, and
that's the official name of it.
And Phil Plait on his blog will occasionally run one when it hits press, and he will occasionally run some that he sees and what they are. In a picture of the terrain on Mars or the moon or whatever, he'll see something, and it won't be religious in nature. And by and large, sometimes I think that those reports end up being better and more convincing. I mean, I've seen pictures of this is Jesus in the wood grain on my bathroom door, and it looks shockingly unlike what it's supposed to be. And yet I've seen others where it's like, hey, is that photoshopped? And it's because we're all prone to seeing those patterns.
My favorite is Jesus on the butt of the dog, but if you haven't seen that one, go look for it. It's a hoot. Anyway, I had to throw that out.
Okay, I just wanted to throw that at you guys. I
you know what'd be cool? You know what'd be cool? To see a pine cone in a piece of toast.
There you go.
Right. And it would have to be deeply religiously significant for some reason.
Cool.
You can use your imagination and make up a reason.
Yeah. Hey, well, we went on so long with one call that I hope we've wrapped yours up nicely and can move on.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks, David.
Bye.
We've got Eric in East Stroudsburg.
Hi.
Hi.
I was recently in a radio debate with a evangelical preacher, ex-pastor, and he brought up the argument, which is basically a God of the gaps argument, in my opinion. Logic or inductive reasoning is a Christian concept, and I was wondering how you guys would go about taking that out. I went out and said it's a God of the gaps argument. Said you're basically saying logic exists, therefore God exists.
Oh, the idea that God invented logic?
Yeah, that you can only have logic with God.
Oh, yeah. I'd call that a stealing credit sort of thing.
I'm confused, though, because was this some formation of the transcendental argument for the existence of God, or was this specifically having to do with inductive reasoning?
This specifically had to do with inductive reasoning, which the preacher was using.
Okay, I'd have to see the argument or hear it, but it's ridiculous. I mean, unless your argument is God gave us a brain, brains are required for inductive reasoning, therefore God is required for inductive reasoning. That's a valid argument, it's just not sound because they haven't demonstrated the first premise, which is God gave us a brain. If they're arguing instead that inductive reasoning is not possible unless there is this transcendent God being who made it possible, then it's a different version of the transcendental argument for the existence of God, which addresses the three logical absolutes.
Yeah, that's the argument he was using.
The
and then
three
when he
logical
asked me where
absolutes?
logic came from,
Yeah.
I said, I don't know, and he started to use that against me.
Yeah.
Well, then he's trying to shift the burden of proof to you. He has to prove that A, there is a God, and B, that God did this thing, right?
Yeah, I had a lengthy debate with Matt Slick on this show about TAG, the transcendental argument, and we're not going to do it all again today, although I do notice that the other caller that is in the queue wants to talk about exactly the same thing, I think. So maybe we are going to talk about it today.
My basic thing was I then went on to list all these other ridiculous possibilities like Allah, invisible pink unicorn, flying spaghetti monster, and said I could assert they're the reason for inductive reasoning.
Yeah, they're
You
equally
have to prove
valid.
yours. reason is the right one.
Well, the typical arguments, and I'll have to give him the benefit of the doubt here. The typical argument is that there must be some being, and so he would probably agree with all your premises, and then say, now it is our objective to figure out which of those beings it actually is, or which group of beings are actually responsible for it. So I think your approach would end up giving away the farm, because we don't need to concede that much. They need to make their case that the nature of logic, or the existence of logic, is contingent upon some transcendent being, and I can defend that it's not, and have.
Well, I think what I actually said was, if we concede that something created this, we still don't know what it is, but we can't even concede that.
Yes, and that's a perfect point to make. That at the end of the day, for example, with Matt Slick's formulation of tag on his website, at the end of the day, even if I were to concede all of his points, all it gets to is, at some point there must have been a mind that is ultimately responsible for the nature of logic. It tells us nothing at all about the nature of that mind, whether it still exists, or whether it's tied to Jesus, Allah, the bunny rabbits. It reminds me in a few ways of the various cosmological arguments, like Kalam, which is going to eventually posit that there had to be something at the beginning. And even though the arguments are flawed, both Tag and Kalam are flawed, and we can point those out. Even if they were true, they do not justify, they do not support what the individual presenting the argument believes, because it's possible that even if it were logically true that there had to be a first cause that had to necessarily be something godlike, that doesn't mean it still has to exist. It could have burnt itself out in the process of creating these universes. So they then have to come up with a whole new argument that demonstrates what they're saying. And the funny thing, the thing that I've been, somebody suggested I do, and I've done it since, is ask these people who are presenting the transcendental argument for the existence of God, the Kalam cosmology, anything like that. Is this why you believe? Was this the thing that convinced you? Or, in fact, do you believe for other reasons, and now you are positing these arguments to kind of reinforce your own delusion and attempt to convince others who would not be convinced by the gullible, asinine crap that convinced you in the first place? You can phrase it slightly different.
You might be more diplomatic. But
I probably would phrase it that way if it wasn't like a public debate that I was having there.
Yeah,
But
I mean, granted, I've got a couple potential public debates coming up in the fall semester. You can believe that I will certainly be more diplomatic. I'm having fun on the show. I'm not mad. I'll get frustrated, but it's about entertainment. Because if I sat here and did the dry crap that goes on at debates, none of you guys would be watching. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was kind of disappointing because
I wouldn't be doing it.
because I was invited by the preacher onto his radio show. So.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be doing this because it wouldn't be any fun. I like to actually have fun when I do.
well, it sounds like you've done a lot of homework for that. I mean, these debates, they can be very challenging because there's a lot of rhetorical tricks that are used, and if you're arguing honestly, often it's easy to get tripped up by those, so there's quite a bit of showmanship that goes on in these sorts of things, and it's very easy to come out looking like you're an idiot, or you get wrapped around some niggly thing, and the preacher or whatever looks good because they spewed so much BS that you haven't had a chance to respond to. So it's a kind of a dangerous thing to be doing. So you got to be well prepared.
I admit he got me a couple of times, but he also brought up the moral argument. So I got him to say on air that it was perfect to rip pregnant women's stomachs open with swords because Hosea said so.
Great.
Okay. Well, good for you. I mean, that's where the logic goes with this thing, with the Bible. I guess it's Deuteronomy or Numbers.
It was Hosea.
Hosea.
I forget which one is Hosea, but it talks about ripping pregnant women's stomachs open with swords.
Yeah.
Lovely stuff. Yeah.
So I got him some places too, but he was probably the better public speaker, so there was some advantage for him.
Yeah, and the important thing to remember is that this idea of who won or lost a debate that may matter in collegiate debates that are judged and scored and graded and things like that. I'll accept I'll accept almost any debate offer out there, and have accepted a couple, although we haven't done them yet. And I'll go into them knowing that I'm the underdog. I'm probably not going to convince people in the audience, just like I come on this show every week. The people, I don't think Hal is going to be convinced because of anything I said, but somebody else might benefit from it, and at some time in the future, Hal might benefit from it. And in any case, I benefit from it now.
What I'm finding is that maybe not the people who are listening to it completely are, like, outside of my friends are finding any difference in their opinions, but some of my friends are now coming up and asking me questions that they would have never asked before.
Well, good.
So,
And I think
but
I think
anyway.
the public benefits by having these sorts of things where these issues of ultimate concern are talked about, and that's part of the reason why we do the show. Is these are important topics, and our viewpoint, I think, deserves to be heard. Anyway, so good for you. Good for you.
So thanks
Anyway,
a lot.
I'd just
Thanks a
like
lot
to
for
thank
calling.
you for your time today, and you did give me some extra points to think about when going about that topic from here on out.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, Eric.
All right.
Have a good day. One of the things, this idea, or we get, I've been asked a number of times, why do you care? Why can't you just let people have their beliefs? People can have their beliefs. I'm not trying, I care because I care about whether or not something's true, and because I care about the world that I live in, et cetera. I know there are plenty of atheists and agnostics and secularists out there who have absolutely no interest in discussing these or having debates or public debates because they want to go out and enjoy their life, and good for them.
Nothing wrong with that.
I got no objection. This is something that I enjoy doing, and I actually give a damn, so I'm going to do it. Well, yeah, but aren't you? Doesn't this mean that you I don't know, secretly believe or something? Because why would you spend so much time talking about something that you don't believe in or whatever? And the answer is, the reason I talk about it so much is because it's a real problem. People really believe things and then really take actions based on those beliefs, and those actions really affect all of us. I'm baffled at why more people don't seem to care. I'm baffled at when somebody asks me, I just can't understand why an atheist would do that. I don't know how to answer you, because to me, the only reason to not is because you don't give a damn, which is entirely your right. I would encourage, I'd like to see more people caring, but, if you don't, you don't. We've got from La Crosse, is it Ian or Ian?
Ian.
Ian, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Pretty good.
What's up?
All right. So I saw a YouTube video about a week ago, and it had like 6 things that naturalism does not account for, or something like that. And I made a response which refuted 4 of them, but I'm not really sure that I like my answer to 2 of them. And they were, it doesn't account for absolute laws of logic or objective truth. And other than the fact that that doesn't prove any specific God, what problems are there with that?
Well, first of all, who said that naturalism was supposed to be an explanation for everything? I mean, assuming one is a naturalist, one has adopted a naturalist philosophical position, the fact that it doesn't answer everything doesn't prove that it's not true. The fact that we haven't explained everything by way of naturalistic explanations only demonstrates that we have not yet explained them. It doesn't demonstrate that they are impossible to be explained.
Okay.
So when somebody says naturalism can't explain this, it's like saying evolution doesn't explain the origins of life. Well, okay, maybe that's beyond it. Now, I realize that naturalism is a more broad and explanation, but actually a better analogy would be saying that, well, science hasn't explained X yet. Okay, so what? That doesn't mean that science can't explain it. It doesn't mean that it's beyond explanation. That is a big kind of argument from ignorance of, you can't explain this using your methodology, therefore we're justified in positing supernatural explanations. No, you're not. There are no more. It's back. You could use this argument for anything. Going back to the lightning bolts I was talking about before. Once upon a time, those people with a naturalistic worldview had no explanation for lightning bolts. And people then felt that they were justified in positing supernatural explanations. They were not justified. They were wrong, and eventually we found an explanation. Now, we may never find an explanation for some things, but I find that a lot of the objections that people launch against this, like I was talking in the last call, and you may look up the discussion or debate that I had with Matt Slick on this show about the transcendental argument for the existence of God, because the logical absolutes and things like that are what tend to come up in these discussions. Oh, naturalism can't explain this. Actually, yeah, I'm pretty sure that you're making some kind of category error there, because the nature of the logical absolutes are such that they don't exist as things that need an explanation. They are simply true. They are, the thing we went round and round about is Matt tried to say that everything is either physical or conceptual. And I was saying that no, that's not a true dichotomy. There are things like the absolutes that are neither. And he wasn't accepting that answer because I couldn't put a name on the category. And one of the potential names that I should have come up with was right there in his argument, and that is transcendent or transcendental according to the definitions we were using. The simpler thing is that these things are simply true. Their value that we build on, the laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, are things that we build on to create the structure of thought and reasoning. But they don't exist as things. They didn't come into being with the universe. They didn't come into being because of a thought. They're simply true. And so people tend to say, naturalism can't explain that. So what? The fact that you don't have an explanation doesn't make some other explanation true.
Yeah, that's definitely where to hang your hat is it's an argument from incredulity, right, or argument from ignorance. So that's where a good place to stop, because you can get these logical things you can get wrapped around pretty easily by the theists, especially ones like Matt Slick, who kind of know all the rhetorical tricks and these sorts of things. So it's their burden of proof to say, hey, where did these things come from and how did they come about, and the fact that they're there is not necessarily a proof of God. So I hope that helps, Ian.
Yeah, the response that I gave was that, well, first of all, they're assuming that the default state of the universe is that truth is not absolute or truth is subjective or something like that. And the second thing they're assuming is that if God existed, that would somehow change that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are big assumptions, both of them. Yeah.
Because when you start talking about, objective reality, objective truth, things like that, you're probably on murky ground, and you're probably dealing with somebody that's saying, you don't have an answer for this, and I do think that I have an answer for this, therefore mine is more viable and your entire worldview is crap. And it's almost something that I think is so asinine we shouldn't even have to respond to it. Unfortunately, as we saw with Hal and others who have convinced themselves that they're open-minded, that they are investigating using principles that are rational, when they hear something that confirms or is consistent with what they already believe to be true, they latch onto it. And it becomes an oh duh moment. And I did the same thing. I had, and I've talked about this before, I had an oh duh moment that was probably one of the stupidest things I've ever done. And that was, I asked a member of my family who was, from my view, somebody who was wise and intelligent and a good Christian who made good arguments. And I was asking, how do I argue with an atheist? And he said, oh, well, you just have to ask them where their morals come from, because they can't possibly have any objective source for morals. And I said, I had an oh duh moment. Like, of course. That's, how did I not see that before? It's so obvious. And then I went out and used it. And boy, am I glad I did,
You got smacked around probably.
Yeah, I was. The difference, of course, being that once somebody made a demonstration of why that was one of the stupidest things anybody could say, I went, oh, yeah, how could I have been that dumb? There's something different about, there's some presupposition, some protective shell, some compartmentalization, and it's probably different for most people. There's not going to be one answer or one argument that solves it for everybody, but we make mistakes. And boy, do we tend to latch onto things. I mean, I used to glibly point out, to some callers that of the two of them, I'm the only one that's demonstrated he could actually change his mind. They're calling in to preach the things that I used to believe, and I changed my mind, and here's why I changed it. Can you give a refutation for the reasons that I changed it? And no, of course they can't, because their beliefs are based on faith or personal experience or interpretation, etc. Yeah, I like what you're doing, and I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, and that absolute morals thing was one of the other four things the guy said, and that was actually the easiest one to refute. So
yeah. All right. Well, we're closing in on out of time, so I got to let you go so I can get to at least one more caller.
all right.
Thank you
See
for
ya.
your call.
Thanks, Ian.
I think he said bye.
I think he said bye too. We've got Aaron in Austin.
Yes,
Hey, thanks for waiting.
thanks. Hey, I've got a question for y'all about Bible prophecy, the end times, and nuclear apocalypse.
Okay.
Basically, I'm wondering what y'all's views are on it. I've heard this prophet guy in Austin here on the local channel speak that Abilene, his hometown, that he's one of these prophets that is supposed to live through the end times, and that's where he's coming across, and he's basically saying that a third of the population of Earth will be killed off, from nuclear apocalypse and stuff like that. Just doesn't sound very heartening to me.
Go ahead.
I don't see any difference between this guy and the guy that stands on the street corner with a sandwich board saying the end is nigh.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been doomsayers all over the place.
It's not remarkable that somebody can read something into the Bible and make money off of it, or turn it into a ministry of some sort. That people have been doing that all along.
And have that holier than thou view. That kind of pissed me off.
The thing is, people will make claims like this all the time. Whether or not there's anything valid behind them remains to be seen. They need to actually demonstrate with evidence. And one of the claims is that these people tend to get credence from is that, well, I'm not getting rich. I'm out here doing this because I believe it sincerely and blah blah blah. I believe that they're doing it, and I believe that they're doing it because they believe it sincerely. But don't think for a second that they're not getting rich. They might not have a penny in their pocket like me, but they're getting rich because there are more things that they get out of this than just pennies and dollars.
I mean, that's not
and that
something
is
you really,
attention
as a
and
kid,
credibility.
You look and say,
and I gotta stop you because we're out of time. I gotta stop you because we're out of time.
We're sorry.
There's the crew. Show thyselves. There they are. Okay. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Well, there will be no show next week or the following week. There's a studio conflict next week, and the following week that's the 4th of July
Atheism
weekend.
withdrawal.
So it's 3 weeks until we're back on again. I apologize. I meant to mention that earlier. I'm sure the chat room's going crazy now. So, find a pine cone and have a good week.